Okay, day. There we go. Very nice. Yes, yes. Sorry, just doing the usual thing here. Making sure that this is properly shared, so on and so forth. Kind of lower the volume so I can optimally check into the chat ski. But hope everybody's having a fantabulous Tuesday. The first few who may be migrating in. I was actually not 100% if we were going to do this today because of the fact that we have a brand new Stephen King movie that is dropping tonight, and Cecil wants to review it with me. And so we're like, okay, are we going to push Hail to Stephen King to Wednesday again? Because due to certain trailers, we've been doing that quite a bit lately. There was the Halloween trailer. There was a few other things where we just, did that little pusheroo, so to speak. But yeah, we're going to be getting the Mr. Harrigan's phone in the coming days. The issue is the fact that Chucky is about to debut, the second season of that. Also, there is the new interpretation because it's not a remake of Hellraiser. It's a new Hellraiser film, and it's essentially taking the Scream approach where they're like, "Yo, it's a new Hellraiser. We're not going to give any distinction as far as like a subtitle or anything of that nature, Deader or, Dead World or whatever. I'm trying to think of all the different Hell on Earth, whatever. So yes, there's a lot of other stuff that is hitting in the coming days. And so for that reason, Mr. Harrigan's phone might actually not be posted until next week for Hale. I was originally wanting to do the Stephen King cookbook, but that's going to be a lot of post-production as opposed to just us watching something and then overlaying a little bit of footage and stuff. So yeah, it's a busy month. So Movie Mike, what is up, sir? Hope you are doing great. I'm hopeful eventually we can get back to a little bit of proper discussion with CP and Lindsay and the rest of the gang over there. It was a lot of fun when we got the chance to do that, man. So, and Jose Storms, a very active participant in the Hail to Stephen King Facebook group. Much appreciated. And as always, I like to give a little bit of time for peeps to kind of filter in and, get properly acquainted, as this book has been out for almost a month now. And so book of the month, with my changing schedule work-wise, doing a live show in the middle of the week on Tuesday, as I've mentioned a few times, has been increasingly difficult. I'm very happy that I'm able to actually get this one done today because of the fact that I do some driving for my other job. And so my vehicle is actually being worked on currently. And so based on that, I was afforded a little bit of time in this late afternoon, early evening to make sure that I get this done. But I don't know. A Saturday live book of the month, which we did previously, would be significantly easier. So, once again, if anybody wants us to try to change that, let us know. Comments and likes and all that different stuff. I don't know. It's so strange in this particular regard when we're trying to mobilize everybody for a schedule change because once again I am the second in command of Search. Well, I don't even want to say that specifically, but Cecil runs the show, man, and so the final approval always goes through him as far as how we're gonna just reconfigure scheduling for not just this program but everything. So in any event, yes, I'm very excited to be finally. I'm not going to say like getting this particular burden off my back, but I did a first impressions review of this that, once I start the episode proper, I'll be getting into, some more concise thoughts. But at least for those in the pre-tape, because I always try to trim this down to when I started properly, when I'm first allowing peeps to filter in and so on and so forth. Yeah, I felt this was kind of a Frankenstein of a lot of different stuff from King, and not just King, but various other fantasy and fairy tales and so on and stuff that I had seen before. But hey, I'm going to get into that properly here in just a few minutes. I'd like to at least wait until we are in the double digis. So yeah, if that is the case. But once again, I mean, yeah, a live show midweek. I know how tough that is, especially when it's only once a month. So just going to X that out. And yeah, I'm just going to get rock-a-locking since, we just hit the 10 a moment ago. So, all right, peeps. Long days and pleasant nights, fellow travelers, along Path of the Beam. I'm known on this level of the tower as Jaime in Fuego. And if it please you, join me here for a bit of palaver on Hail to Stephen King. That's Reason. And obviously, Devaninos, I welcome you to the horror show. And this is a particular live program that I have not had the opportunity to do based on some scheduling conflicts from the last couple of months. So, long story short, I always like to do at the beginning of a new month a live book discussion from the previous month. And so the latest from Sai King, My Beloved El Rey, came out. Oh, I knocked that. Let's just reconfigure a little bit. But yes, September 6th, we had the release of Fairy Tale. And so I gave a bit of initial thoughts on this. And it's not that I was like downtrodden and like overly, I don't know, overly negative or anything like that, but it felt very familiar. And so that is at least one of the few things that I will give credit. Even though I wasn't over the moon for Billy Summers, that was at least King doing something pretty drastically different, despite my gripes with that. Whereas Fairy Tale, unfortunately, a little bit to its detriment, it was like just about every beat felt like something that I had seen or read before from King or from another author. And I know in many ways this was him trying to pay homage to so many different things, but it's a little bit different when you've already veered into that so much with your own work. And so that's maybe one of the reasons why I feel I was a little more critical of this than I was even Billy Summers, and maybe even a little bit more critical than later and some of the other, recent releases of Sai King, If It Bleeds. But man, Life of Chuck from If It Bleeds, so damn good. So I don't know. This was familiar, but not necessarily in a bad way, but in kind of one of those ways where you're getting reacquainted with, family members or, long lost friends that you haven't really, been in touch with in quite a bit. And yes, immediately you kind of realize you're like, oh, they're just as endearingly the same. It's not like a lot has significantly changed. And that's, once again, the double down. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but forewarning for everybody, unlike my first impressions review that I did previously on September 7th, I think it was 6th, 7th, right around when the book first came out. This is spoilers. And so I would really love to hear thoughts from anybody who was jumping in the chat, who has actually read this, some of your thoughts on this. Was it too much of a retread with various different things? Everything from, the Talisman to Harrigan's Phone and various others. Or did you feel like, especially in the midsection when King was really just developing the fantasy aspect of it, do you think that he set this particular tale apart in a significantly better fashion? I'm not 100%. Hold on one second because there is some exterior noise. Thank you so very much, everybody. It was bleeding in a little bit more than I was anticipating. But yeah, so thoughts from everybody who has actually finished this one, or at least has read a significant chunk and is okay with just, thoughts and spoilers and so on and so forth. Please chime in. I would absolutely love to hear those particular thoughts. And so, yeah, gang, I'm going to give shout outs now that we have started the festivities proper. We have Jose Storms, as I mentioned in the pre-show, Movie Mike, who I had the awesome opportunity to share some palaver with back during one of the more recent, and granted it was a few months ago at this particular point, but CP is from Willis Greedia. He has a show that I was a part of for a long time called Show Business, and so Movie Mike and I both got to get properly acquainted with that a few months ago when there was kind of a throwback show, which was cool. Okay. He says, yes, it's definitely hit on a lot of classic King's tropes right from page one. Yes, for sure. And then Daniel Corey, who is a longtime supporter and, somebody I hold in high regard in not just Facebook friendship, but the Hail to Stephen King group on Facebook. He is chiming in and saying, what up, Fuego, at work and just popping in for a quick few. Love the book, but I'd rate it a upper middle tier. Okay. And that's where I would, somewhere in that vicinity is probably where I would kind of classify it as well, because of the fact that it didn't wow me. It didn't really come in with anything that surprised me too thoroughly, but it was very capable. It was very solid, and the prose especially, and the ability of King to endear characters, most notably once we finally get the most unique thing about this book, I would say, is when we initially get over to this this other, the other, or whatever Charlie Reed tends to call it, impetus, and then I'm trying to remember the specific name that it's eventually classified as, but yeah, it's where he is encountering these escaped like royals of sorts, and the distinction between all of them and this, fish out of water, this boy in this mythical, magical sort of world. That's where I feel like the book shined the most personally. And that's where I feel like King broke the most new ground. And a lot of the rest of it was not really the most unique, not really, the most, I don't know. I'm trying not to like the one thing that I told myself when I was getting into this review and I was about to film it. I was like, okay, unlike in the first impressions, I'm gonna try very distinctively and very cognizantly to focus on everything that I liked, as opposed to, and also just criticism, as opposed to just bringing in the comparative aspect, which was. It was really tough for me not to go there, especially having read every King book over all of those years, and the big initial plight of all of this. But okay, Daniel follows it up with, I think he did a great job paying homage to a lot of literary heavy hitters, especially Lovecraft and Bradbury. Yeah, and not just Lovecraft and Bradbury, who I know he does HPL in the dedication at the beginning and a few others, but lots of fairy tales, lots of different things of that nature. But I just keep thinking back, and I guess I'm going to go away from what I just said. But book 5 of the Dark Tower was a similar Wolves of the Kala being a similar celebration of literature, and most notably, fairy tales and that sort of story that is passed along, and just more generally, I suppose, the power of storytelling. And that vibe and that sort of like theme and thread is very much alive within fairy tale. And so once again, I'm glad that King decided to go back to that, and he does expand upon it significantly in this regard compared to what he did, whereas it was a hodgepodge of many things in Wolves of the Kala, but I guess it kind of is in this one too. So foot in mouth, Fuego, like immediately. So let's jump down and see what else we got. Okay. 7 Theodius 7, not his masterpiece, but a good read. I hope he visits this verse more. Late to the show, is this Dark Tower related? Juggler Assassin. There's a lot of people, myself included, who thought that this was going to be Dark Tower related. And this is a spoiler discussion, as I said at the very beginning of this. This is not a Tower book. I suppose that it could have some sort of connective tissue, and especially as I was finishing up the last of my spoilers notes about this particular book, could it be a twinner verse to Gilead and Midworld and Endworld and all that different stuff? I suppose, because when our lead character Charlie Reed enters this world through this staircase of it's like 175, 185 stairs, something like that. I have read the book 3 times now. So I read it, I listened to it, and then I read/listened to it. So I did the double down since the first impressions review that I put up right after it came out. And the fact that you're jumping into, I'm trying to remember, it's a bunch of blood poppies, if I remember correctly. Let's just jump up to blood red poppies. And so that, as you guys see in the thumbnail, if you happen to see it before you just clicked on description or title or whatever, you see a kid they're a young adult, more so, so he's older than Jake Chambers, but and older than Jack Sawyer, who are the 2 characters that I would compare Charlie Reed most notably to. He's walking out and looking at this big area with very similar to all of the red roses that I'm trying so hard to be positive about this one, and not that it was bad, but there were just so many similarities, and I guess you can explain it away with it being some sort of twinning verse. But if you're going to think about the talisman and the fact that, we already dealt with twinner verses and, similar intentions and worries about if people from our world, not necessarily Keystone Earth or anything, but from like the regular world, whatever level of the tower it may be, would, with the depletion of resources that we've experienced here, would they, if they discovered this particular area, want to go down into it and just pillage and take and, just destroy? Very similar to like in Independence Day, where they're like, they go from planet to planet, and they sap up all the resources and they just go to their next place. And so there's that implication that those from our world, whatever level of the tower it may be, if they discovered this other, they would do similar things. And that was a theme in the Talisman, which was obviously El Rey's collaboration with Peter Straub, rest peacefully. And so, yeah, it's not a tower book, though, despite the fact that there's Easter eggs like characters saying long days and pleasant nights. You've got Dearborn Road, which is in Illinois, where Charlie Reed lives and stuff. So you've got those little nods and winks, but very similar to what a lot of people thought the Institute was going to be, where it was going to tie in with Breakers and where it was going to just have that sort of synchronicity and congruity and intertwinement. Nope. Donuts. King kind of, I'm not going to say he bait and switched because that's not necessarily fair, but I feel like it's, at least with Eyes of the Dragon, which this also has a few similarities to, most notably with older, more handsome brother, younger brother who's like upset. Although for Eldon, I think his name is, who ends up being the big bad, you kind of you sympathize with him a little bit more. And that's not to say that in the Eyes of the Dragon you don't. But yeah, similarity there too. It's, I don't know. It's one thing to take inspiration from your previous things, but yeah, this is most definitely, as I said in the pre-show, it is a little bit of a Frankenstein as far as lots of different things that King has done before. And then when you wear your heart on your sleeve and you're making it very evident that you're referencing everything fairy tale wise, and even what is considered modern fairy tales. Shit, dude, he mentions at one particular point that Star Wars is a modern fairy tale or fantasy, and in a lot of ways it most definitely is, being a big Star Wars fan. Also love Trek, but nonetheless, yeah, you've got everything in this, from Potter sort of similarities as far as those who cannot be named, to Hunger Games as far as a competition aspect. You have, I guess I'm just going to go full blown, and then there is also the more deliberate comparisons from everything to Rumpelstiltskin, Rapunzel, the old woman who lived in a shoe, Jack and the Beanstalk. But hey, it's a cool thing that he was able to fold all of these different pre-existing stories into aspects of the narrative that still allowed it to progress forward, to make sense. And this is, once again, not me hating on this book, everybody. This is me just being comparative. And because, despite the fact that I promised myself I wasn't going to, just do that sort of thing, I don't really understand how, because King was so deliberate with fairy tale, with the fact that he was, just drawing inspiration from other things. I don't really think that you can fairly, especially in a spoiler discussion, review this without just going into that sort of detail. And so, just back to the beginning of this. So as at the very backside of this book, so Charlie Reed, and just as he even says at one particular point in the book, he's like READE, so like a reader, but minus the R, he says, "I'm sure I can tell this story. I am also sure no one will believe it. And that's fine with me. Telling it will be enough. My problem, and I'm sure many writers have it, not just newbies like me, is deciding where to start. My first thought was with the shed, because that's where my adventures really began. But then I realized I would have to tell about Mr. Bowditch's first and how we became close. Only that never would have happened except for the miracle that happened to my father. A very ordinary miracle, you could say. One that's happened to many thousands of men and women since 1935, but it seemed like a miracle to a kid. Only that isn't the right place either, because I don't think my father would have needed a miracle if it hadn't been for that goddamned bridge. So that's where I need to start, with the goddamned Sycamore Street Bridge. And now, thinking of those things, I see a clear thread leading up through the years to Mr. Bowditch and the padlock shed behind his ramshackle old Victorian, but a thread is easy to break. So not a thread, but a chain, a strong one. And I was a kid with the shackle clamped around his wrist. So troubled kid, not in the best sort of situation as is laid out for us initially. His mother is going to get some fried chicken and she dies in this horrendous manner. And as is really clarified at the very end of the book, like, she is hit by this large vehicle and some of her stays, and in fact, most of her stays up on the goddamn bridge, but like from the shoulder upward, including head and neck and so on and so forth. Yeah, that's King being gruesome and upsetting. I'm just gonna get a little drizzle of my Pennywise blood here, as you guys can see. But yeah, so that traumatizes him. His father, who was like kind of a moderate drinker, veers into getting significantly more extreme, loses his job, and the miracle, after praying to whatever may or may not be up there. As an agnostic, I'm not really saying anything either way. I'm not injecting faith into this discussion, but at least as far as whether coincidental or a prayer being granted, so to speak, Charlie gets his wish, and his father gets involved with AA. And this is very much that sort of reflective aspect of Sai King in and of itself, because, yeah, King has been a member of AA for like 40 years, 30 something years now, almost 40. Basically, right around the late 80s when he, hit that rock bottom of sorts, despite the fact that he was still at the top level of notoriety, creativity. But it was right around the time the Tommyknockers came out, as many of you know, that's when things just kind of got a little unruly and the confrontation transpired, and he got sober from there. But yeah, so Charlie Reed's prayers are answered, but as is kind of only touched upon a little bit, because it's mentioned passingly, but frequently, which is weird. So it's mentioned a lot throughout the book, but every single time it's like our narrator. So Charlie Reed is our narrator. It's being written from a first person perspective, with the exception of one particular passage, which is from Mr. Bowditch, Adrian/Howard. And then, and in the audiobook, awesomely enough, it's actually done by King himself. Props to the audiobook. I have to jump on and say that there's particular peeps that King employs, and his Simon & Schuster peeps always go about having a part of the scenario, if this will load properly. But yeah, what's his name? Seth Numbridge, I want to say. So yeah, not the usual King narrator of sorts, but did a terrific job, most notably when we get to the full-on fantasy aspect of this. And it's there's different voices to do, sound effectsy sort of bits and whatnot. And yeah, he does a very solid job. But King, for one particular recorded aspect, where Bowditch, after he has passed on, has left this cassette tape for Charlie, and it's a very, very significant, very cool scene, because King delivers it well. He's only acted, and it's mostly cameos, you guys know, in his work, but legitimately, it's fun, and yeah, he embodies the aspects of the character that he wrote very well. But yeah, so Charlie has made mischief. He's put he's smeared shit on teachers cars, or he's put little mini bombs in mailboxes, and he's been kind of an accomplice to bomb threats. So yeah, he's done some shitty things, but it's glossed over, and so it's obviously a byproduct of the trauma of losing his mother at the particular age that he did. But that's a subplot that I don't think that King really develops particularly well. What he does develop very well is the love and the affinity for a recovering father. And so Charlie with his dad, it's done incredibly well, as far as his dad even having some hiccups, which he very unabashedly mentions, but he stuck with it. He stuck with the program, and I'm not giving any pros, cons, whatever, for AA or anything of that nature, but it's helped King in said regard. And so, good on that. I suppose the ends justifying the means and whatnot. But in this particular story, it's King obviously injecting personal experience in said regard. So, but yeah, Charlie is still damaged, despite the fact that his dad is seemingly putting on that happy face and finally getting back into the workforce, starting his own insurance sort of. I'm trying to remember if it's like an investigation sort of aspect, or if, hey, anybody who works in insurance, man, I just, good luck. You're either a nasty shyster, or, I mean, if you have a good heart about you and you're doing that sort of work, but nonetheless, so where I make the comparisons with Mr. Harrigan's Phone, and even further back to Hearts in Atlantis, is the fact that, yes, this is another instance where there is a rather mysterious, slightly cranky, and this is where I see a lot more similarity with Harrigan's Phone, even than I do with Hearts in Atlantis, because at least Hearts in Atlantis was a collection of different stories that all intertwined. And so, Ted Brodigan was only in that one, and then Garfield, was in the two bookending stories. But Harrigan's Phone, yeah, most definitely has the most similarities to this one in the fact that, yeah, just like Harrigan, Bowditch does not have a phone. He's cranky and standoffish, doesn't like kids, whatever, kind of anti-technology. I'm not sure if this is King injecting this sort of ethos into his sort of proceedings or anything, but yeah, man, it's interesting in said regard. But so similarities there as far as a kind of haphazard, unexpected friendship, but the difference in this particular situation is the fact that we have radar. And this is where I feel like King also injects some of the most unique sort of just prose and thoughts and angles into the storytelling here, because of the fact that, King with Molly, the Thing of Evil, and she dominates his Twitter a lot of the time as far as cute photos of his little corgi. You can tell that King writes about dogs as far as the relationship of, master and animal and stuff. And I hate even using the term master, but, owner, I think, is a better word. But he writes with such a tender affinity. And also he writes about the responsibility that somebody who is caring for another animal, it's very much like having a kid, but on a slightly lessened sort of degree. But yet it pivots into a different sort of scenario slightly, in the fact that you don't have someone that's going to like question you, especially as like the intellect of a child progresses and adapts and improves and so on and so forth. With a dog, a canine, most notably in this particular state. And my parents are big German Shepherd people. They bred German Shepherds when I was growing up and I was a little lad. And my dad used to work with the Phoenix Police Canine Unit. So he used to actually put on the bite suits and train these crazy canines, man. So, yeah, German Shepherd specifically, I've always had a big just sort of love and appreciation for them, which is cool. And so I loved all of the interactions with Radar, and the fact that, yes, Bowditch has a very interesting, mysterious sort of history. The fact that he has a stockpile of gold, the fact that, he's long retired but has all of this wealth, the fact that he has this shed, and I have to give another comparison, very similar to 11/22/63, and the fact that there is this certain small area where you can transport. I don't know. Sorry, King. I just, having read all your stuff, I can't help it. I'm like, oh, this reminds me of this. This reminds me of this. This reminds me of this. But once again, the stuff with the dog, nowhere near. I mean, aside from maybe Kojak in The Stand, it's the best representation, I think, of a dog that we have had. Probably even better than that. And so, and also, as we will get to here in a moment, the stuff with the different escaped siblings from that particular line of royals once you get over into that other world. But yeah, Bowditch, unfortunately, he's got health problems, and not just from when Charlie and him originally make each other's acquaintance, and he falls down, and he like breaks his leg, and his hip is fucked up, and all this different stuff. But they forge a friendship, and that's where there's a lot of Harrigan similarities. There's no iPhone that is, like a, sort of like, I don't know, like just adjoining sort of subject matter. But yeah, it is still written endearingly despite the familiarity. And then Bowditch dies, and that's when the story veers from our world into something significantly different. And that's where, as I said, it's kind of a Frankenstein a little bit. But then again, in hindsight, after really finishing this once again, after my third listen/read earlier today, I was like, this has big time vibes of a lot of stuff that was going on in the 80s, whether it was Neverending Story, whether it was Labyrinth. Or even if we're not even just going to say 80s, if we're going to go back to like Alice in Wonderland, and if we're going to go back to The Wizard of Oz, which are a few of my absolute favorite different things, Lewis Carroll, Frank Baum. I love these sort of, someone from our world travels into a different fantastical world. And yes, it happened in The Talisman, with Jack Sawyer, but I still feel in a lot of ways like that one didn't go as full-blown fantasy as this one did, because you had the Oatley Tavern or whatever, where, Jack is being abused by the bar owner and everything. And then you've also, like, you've also got the stuff in the boys' home, where he's stuck there with Wolf. Like Talisman actually veered more into the adventure horror with a sprinkling of fantasy, in my estimation, whereas this one, coming from somebody who is not a big fantasy person. And so shout out if you guys want fantasy. My dude, Mike Kearns from Mike's Book Reviews, and he also has a new sub-channel that he just started recently, Mike's Media Reviews, where he's like, okay, if it's not books, I want to have that other outlet, which I'm so stoked for him, just seeing those numbers going up. It's really rad stats because that guy kicks ass. But if you want a true aficionado of the fantasy genre, we're talking, Jordan and, oh goodness, obviously Tolkien and, I'm trying to remember who wrote Hyperion and some of that other stuff. Simmons. Like, long story short, I haven't, like, that is not my forte. King and a little bit of other horror stuff is really, but I am not like a full-blown booktuber as in comparison. I spend significantly more time watching television and film, and I appreciate, fantasy television and film, but I'm not like a House of the Dragon, Game of Thrones person. I am not a Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power sort of person. I saw all the Hobbit films. I saw all the Lord of the Rings films. I own all the extended editions, but I would say that I am a casual fantasy fan at the end of the day. And so in that regard, maybe that hindered my appreciation of this because of the fact that I've seen a little bit of, fantasy and I'm like, oh, this reminds me of this. This reminds me of this. And I know that there's similarities in that genre, just like there is with horror, just like there is in drama and adventure and whatever. That old saying, there's nothing new under the sun. It's really about how you differentiate in some of those smaller aspects. And maybe I'm being a little bit too critical of the fact that I can see throughout this book, with the exception of a few different bits here and there, similarities to various things that I am only mildly acquainted with. So, I am not saying in any regard that I'm like hardcore fantasy know-it-all or anything of that nature, because I am not, guys. And also it's something I appreciate, but it's not something that I just anxiously gravitate towards either. And so maybe that would hinder affinity and just like over the moon enthusiasm at least a little bit. But so the first third is essentially in the real world, getting acquainted with Charlie Reed, the dynamic with his father, friendship with the old guy, stuff that we have seen King do before. And then the second part of the book is where we really get into the full-blown fantasy aspect, and where, at least as far as world building goes, I feel like this is where King really shines, at least initially, but the book kind of comes to a grinding halt in the midsection where there is a captivity and there is a training segment for competition and so on and so forth. But since it's been a hot minute since I've jumped into this, and since a few others have actually made their way over, I am very, very stoked to see what everybody has said thus far, because the numbers have grown at least a little bit. They've grown, they fluctuated, so on and so forth. Okay, so what do we got? Late to the show, is this Dark Tower related? Yep, I did that already. All right, so back to Movie Mike. He says, I just think those first 200 pages covered a lot of familiar ground: car accident, alcoholism. Yep, a bond between a child and an old man. The writing was excellent, but a lot of been there, done that. Agreed. And that was kind of what I was trying not to just, like be like, we've seen this, we've done this, but unfortunately it's kind of impossible not to call attention to that. So Richard Forrest, hey Fuego, my mom got this book, but she hasn't read it yet because we're doing work to help people move in. Was planning on borrowing her copy when she was done. Might just get it myself instead. Yeah, it's very worth a read, especially if you're a fantasy fan and you want to see how King approaches it. Now, granted, if you're like a hardcore fantasy person, we're talking like Wheels of Time and all of these different series that I see my buddy Mike mentioning, that you may think that King's attempts are rather pedestrian. I would kind of think that might be the case, which is why, Eyes of the Dragon was written for his daughter, Naomi, and it was so simple and yet so well put together. I don't want to say like don't quit your day job or anything like that, because there was a lot to enjoy about this. And I've seen a lot of my friends, especially fellow YouTubers that are in the sphere along with us and, myself, Cecil and whatnot. I have seen those who aren't big King reader fans. I've seen a few. I just saw one today, Nightmare Maven. She was like, "Do I love Stephen King now?" And she was mentioning Fairy Tale. So I don't know. Maybe if you haven't read a lot of these like I have, and you don't just inherently just have the urge to make the comparisons, I don't know. It's like if you love a band and you listen to everything they've done, including the unreleased B-sides and the bonus tracks from Japanese releases and all this different stuff, and they put out a new record and you're like, "Oh, that song sounds like that song from albums ago." And granted, there is something to having a distinctive sound. Um, I mean, Tempest from the new Tool record is, it's like it sounds familiar, but yet it sounds different, and it's such a tough line to straddle, man. Like I don't know. All that I can do is react and give my give my most genuine thoughts. Okay, Daniel says, question: do you think this world he created is worthy of a revisit in a future book to tell another story? Daniel Corey makes a very good point in the fact that while I feel like there's a lot of lore covered, I still feel like there was so much as far as like, you know, prequel or even the implied sequel sort of stuff, which, King is very funny in the fact that in the epilogue, he calls out some of his own bullshit, which is really funny. I could not help but laugh in the fact that he's like, "Oh, you're wondering why this is referenced and this is referenced by a kid that's this old. Well, check it out. This is why." And he's kind of trying to cover his tracks, which is really funny because, to have constant references to Turner Classic Movies and yet no modern references to a kid in 2009. It's like every sort of thing that he thinks about in the course of this adventure is not anything timely and of that particular year or that era in pop culture. I couldn't help but chuckle. And yes, maybe I'm being a little hard on King because I was one of those kids in high school where I was like, no, I'm not listening to a lot of new music. I'm listening, this was what, early 2000s, late 90s when I was in, junior high and high school and stuff. And so I was like, no, I'm going to listen to Led Zeppelin and Bad Religion and Guns N' Roses and Black Sabbath and Pink Floyd. And I'm like, these are going to be my bands because a lot of new shit sucks. And so that was, hey, I guess like maybe, but I couldn't push everything away from modern movies. I couldn't push everything away from, the stuff that I heard when I was in the goddamn mall or driving around with, other friends that listened to popular music at the time. So I don't know. The fact that King tried to give some justification made me chuckle just a little bit because I highly doubt that Charlie Reed was only in tuned to references from decades past that King can make to kind of facilitate the storytelling. I love you, Al Ray, but yeah, it's kind of funny. But back to Daniel's question though, man. Yeah, most def. I feel like the lore of this was only like the surface was only scratched, and I don't know. One of the better ways to really differentiate this and make it feel less like borrowing ideas from other properties, including your own, I think would be for him to do at least like a short story, a novella, something, or do what all of us wanted and tie it to the tower. Okay. I mean, it was kind of like I don't want to say a tease, but okay. Movie Mike says, yes, I also felt the Eyes of the Dragon vibe very strongly, much more so than the Dark Tower. And yeah, I mean, the Dark Tower does tie in. Delane is mentioned in The Wind Through the Keyhole specifically. And so those are on the same level of the tower, which is especially exciting and interesting. Yep, other worlds than these, as Theodius 7 says, yeah, most definitely. So there is references to other worlds than these. There is references to long days and pleasant nights. Charlie says it at one particular point, and I guess we have a clue that's kind of given where he's like, yeah, it's something my dad read in a book. So maybe that is supposed to be Keystone Earth. I don't know. They also reference, like Cujo from that movie or what. So it's something that King is fond of doing where he's like, there's our world, like this one that we all of us who are taking part in this palaver here on this YouTube channel reside within. And then there is other similar worlds to this particular one. And then obviously there's Toadash craziness, whatever, that all of us, have the opportunity as well. So, okay, Jason, there was this dust storm lately, guys, here in Arizona, and it was like full blown, like 50, 60 mile an hour winds, like huge trees here in the center of Phoenix. were toppled over, fences, all this crap. And I was driving around last night and I got so much dust in my eyes that even putting my contacts back in today, it was like just destroying my eyes. I've been doing like this sort of thing, like trying my damnedest to see. It's been really shitty. In any event, this book reminded me of Princess of Mars. Well, Jason, I am not familiar with Princess of Mars, unfortunately. King Low Key gave some shade to R.L. Stein. Jose Storms is so right, which is really funny, Jose, because R.L. Stein was like, there's a viral, excuse me, there's a viral thing right now where R.L. Stein is talking about a time where he met Stephen King, and he met him recently. And it was kind of about how his stuff was like the precursor, or, what it's essentially R.L. Stein ripped off a lot of Stephen King ideas and just made them scholastic. if you're gonna put it that way. But I mean, as much as I love Kristopher Pike, I mean, Last Vampire and Chain Letter, I know Midnight Club is becoming a thing right now. But yes, King, he kind of puts, and whereas R.L. Stein, in that recent interview that I mentioned, he speaks very kindly of Stephen King. You can tell very similar to Kuntz and some of those others. King does not really like the hack that R.L. Stein is. But I will say, Welcome to the Dead House and Ghost Beach and Monster Blood and Say Cheese and Die, Piano Lessons Can Be Murder. I was like second, third grade when those books were coming out. So yeah, that was my precursor to the bridge that was Kristopher Pike, eventually to get to Sai King. But yes, long live Radar. Amen. Oh, Lou, what is up? Good, sir. I dug the book. Could have stayed in the real world, was totally into Reed, Bowditch, and Radar. Okay, so the Stephen King podcast, if you guys are unfamiliar, my buddy Lou Sitzma is my dude from the Great White North up there in Canada. He has been doing a Stephen King podcast for a long time. He was so gracious enough to give me a little bit of his time a couple of years ago during the pandemic and be part of a big panel that we had all about Stephen King on screen. Myself, the aforementioned Mike Kearns from Mike's Book Reviews and Mike's Media Reviews. And so it was a blast getting his thoughts. Yeah, also Blue Gillian, or Gillian, man, I always mess up your last name, Blue. I apologize, sir, but from Cemetery Dance. So that was like a blast of palaver between those guys. It's here in the Stephen King Focus playlist. And yeah, I'm not hating on it, Lou. That's the big thing here, is that it just felt very familiar in a lot of ways, and almost, as I mentioned earlier, like a Frankenstein, like two books in one. But then as I gave it more consideration, and I'm like, oh, it is Neverending Story, it is Labyrinth, it is Alice in Wonderland, Wizard of Oz, like Start in Our World, fantastical adventure, back to the regular world. It's that sort of thing. And excuse me, as I gave it a little bit more consideration in that regard, I was a little bit more appreciative, honestly, and I've done. That's not going to hinder me from making said comparison. So okay, this is a new name. So we have Justin Headelt here. Been hearing a lot of criticism of it having similar elements from his previous works, but I think it's easier for us as readers to recognize that than he does after 60 plus books. It's fun and very King. Yeah, Justin, you are most definitely right in the fact that it is very King, and it's very King as far as the endearment from the prose, I will definitely say. And, especially in the fact that he's got these very prolific things that he says. And I said that I promised myself I wasn't going to cry. All right, Wayne. But he's got some very great quotes within this. You never know when, and I made this note on both the iPhone and when I was initially reading it. So you never know where the trapdoors are in your life, do you? Like, that was as far as just unexpected calamity, and the fact that, last night I'm driving around, man, and downtown Phoenix, working. The car breaks down, and I'm just like, holy shit, I had no idea this was going to transpire, and I ended up having to get a tow, and my mechanic looks at it earlier today, which is why I didn't get to do a third day of my 31 days of Shocktober, happy holidays sort of thing. And yeah, that's because we definitely do not know, and in a lot of times for the most prolific stuff can't necessarily prepare, ahead of time. And so I thought that was a really good thing. And also, miracles need magic is another quote that I really like. And that's from early in the book where, Charlie's dad is struggling with trying to maintain sobriety. post death of wife and the mother of his child. And yeah, his sponsor basically mentions to Charlie at one particular point, he's like, yeah, miracles can happen, but miracles need magic. And I thought and so that's where, despite all of the different things that we've kind of seen King do before and heard and so on and so forth, that's where he really just gives his unique stamp upon it, is the fact that the prose, the observations, and like, I've been reading a lot of Nick Cutter lately, and I'm just about to finish what is it, Little Heaven, and he's going back to a lot of the observations about when you face the most horrible trauma, very similar to the beginning of part 2 of Pet Cemetery, where it's like, how much horror and insane shit can, this is me speaking verbatim, obviously, but how much can the average person endure before they just totally lose it? If I'm gonna just wrap it up in a nice little package, and it's something Cutter, who is obviously very inspired by Stephen King, especially if you've read Little Heaven, it's very it's very Stephen King, especially It influence. I'm going to be doing a review of that sometime soon because I'm just about to finish it. But yeah, I can. King's not the only one who does it. There's a lot of authors who are, I believe, kind of enraptured. I don't want to say obsessed, but they're beholden. They are just kind of intertwined with these sort of things. I don't think that you would be writing about it as often and revisiting it so much if you weren't thinking about it a lot, if you weren't experiencing some of these aspects yourself personally. And so that's where I guess I can give a little bit of leeway, a little bit of credence, especially as I am finally, over the last year or so, veering more so into other authors of the spooktacular. So let's continue jumping around. Jason also says pacing was good until we hit the dungeon arena sections. I kind of tuned out. Yeah, there is. I'm finally going to jump onto the phone because this is where I made like all of the new notes as far as stuff was going on. So, yep, ironically enough, Mom dead on the goddamn bridge, drinking dead, King's recovery, AA, prayed to God, but miracles need magic. Yep, you see, I was making all of the same. I hadn't even re-looked at these since I started doing the other. And then obviously Adrian Howard, no cell phone. I made those Harrigan comparisons. Charlie Reed makes mischief, sports buddy, blah, 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 blah. But I'm trying to find the exact quote, because I found that you get used to the amazing. If it's in your world, you go with it. No, I don't think that's the one that I was searching for. Oh, goodness. Yep, losing ratings. Well, there's a particular spot in here where, oh, goodness, man. Deep lore, that's briefly explained, but okay, that's not it. God damn it, man. Well, that's the unfortunate problem when you make so many of these friggin' notes. Anyway, there's a dark well on everyone. No, that's not it either. Okay. Well, long story short, there was a time in the book where it is mentioned by Charlie that like the magic is fading and that he's like kind of losing interest. And I'm just speaking, giving it my own little spin on it. But that's the way that I felt in the middle of this story. And so once the fantastical really rears up and yeah, you've got all of these royals and they have different afflictions based on the person who has come into power, without giving spoilers, at least initially. Eventually I will. Yeah, so you've got these family members, one of which is like disfigured and can barely talk. And that's Dora. She's got the whole woman in the shoe sort of tie-in comparison. Dorothy also, she likes wearing little red sneaks and stuff. But then later on, you have Leia, who becomes the love of Charlie, and she can't talk, so she is mute. And then you've got another one being Woody. I'm trying to remember what his like full name proper is. Oh goodness, Fuego. Stephen Woodley. Yeah. And then you've got, for me, the most amusing, and Stephen Woodley is blind, just to aforemention. But then you've got Claudia, and Claudia, who is deaf, is the funniest for me, most notably in the scenes that we have with her on the audiobook, because just the way that she talks, and God damn it, fuck, and just the profanity and the unabashed, just kind of, I don't know, loose cannon aspect of her character. She is really, really great. And so Charlie essentially has to seek the guidance of these former royals that were overthrown and just barely survived. There was also a plague that is going on through this particular world, so to speak, and those who are afflicted with it and kind of going through this aging decomposition sort of aspect, they're called the Greys, and yet there was a bloodline cross pollination sort of thing that transpired, and so that's why those particular royals who were some of them were killed and only a small number of them escaped. Yeah, they are not afflicted by said disease, and this is where the book, after Charlie is finally taken into captivity, is where the book really starts to stall. So I have not watched the, oh goodness, it's not the Blood Wedding or whatever. This is where the fact that I'm not a Game of Thrones person, I know that there's like zombies in that, or some sort of like glowing, I should say, like dead sort of presence. I don't know. In this, you have the Night Watch. You have these night soldiers who, from the photos that I've seen, as far as like a blue glow and skeletal sort of protruding whateverness. I've seen photos I haven't watched, but the way King describes them looked very similar, or at least seemed very similar in my head. And so this particular force of like zombie whatevers who take Charlie Reed into captivity and basically make him train for these like gladiator sort of fights. Yeah, I can make both the not just the, oh goodness, what is the Catch Fire, Hunger Games? Shit, man, I don't even watch Hunger Games, and yet this also borrows a lot from Hunger Games. So that's where, yeah, it borrows a lot from a lot, but yeah, I'm trying not to really get too derogatory about it. I will say that I do enjoy the fact that our hero, our prince, as Charlie is starting to become in this particular segment. It's not until he's taken into captivity and those of this world who are evil and nefarious ones start to kind of realize, they're like, you're not from around here, are you? He's got darkened hair and whatever, but he starts to go through this prophetic transformation, color of his hair, his eyes, all this different stuff. And also just like a visceral charge of him rising to the occasion. He has, as far as the competition goes, once he's thrust into it, he is the 31st, and then they bring in a 32nd because all have to be divided down, just like as it's even mentioned in the book, the NCAA tournament, it's not 64 in this regard, but and then I think there's also the couple others, but anyway, I don't like college basketball, but I'm at least familiar enough with it. But so they're trying to get to this magic number of 32 in captivity so that they can have these like gladiator sort of competitions amongst peeps, these combative sort of fights. And yeah, this 7 foot plus homie, despite the fact that Charlie Reed is pretty big himself, he's like 6'4", 2 something, sports player, football, baseball, scored the final touchdown in turkey ball. But yeah, so he does kind of, he pivots into the bloodthirstiness, the survival mechanism, and he kills this big dude who is kind of gunning for him, who he has to face. But then yeah, he puts the revolt together, and I will say, of all of the characters, there's the one dude whose name eludes me, who was kind of giving him shit, but also kind of admired and respected him a little bit. And then obviously you have Percy, who is the guy who was on the other side of the bars and stuff in this dungeon that that Charlie's being held captive in, that is kind of trying to help and assist, on the sly, kind of on the DL, so to speak. And so Percy is developed fairly well and does actually make his way into the end of the story, so to speak. But it's where, to what was said by Jason, it's where the story drags, man. It just, like, all sense of momentum, where there is, like, you have Charlie sneaking through this desolate, abandoned city, very similar to what we have, in the pavilion, where, so there we have the lively pavilion in what, the Talisman, where Jack Sawyer is walking through, and then you have the abandoned aspect of that during Little Sisters of Eluria, where Roland is going through it, Mr. Deathchain. It's kind of that sort of vibe, and except on a much grander scale. And also the fact that I did dig where King was talking about the fact that even though this huge abandoned city has really very few signs of oil, statues like turning and looking, and he makes the comparison to Howl's Moving Castle. Shout out there. And the fact that he's trying to get to this particular spot, this castle, and it feels like when he turns away, it's in a different place. And so the veering and the morphing and the movement was really cool. And then also the graveyard scene, which gave me some vibes a little bit of Army of Darkness, just not of the goofy aspect of that scene in Army of Darkness, the great Sam Raimi Bruce Campbell film, but the hand coming up and the movement and him just running around. And there's also a lot of horror movie self-awareness to this that Charlie kind of in his own cognizance, brings about and stuff. And then getting Radar to the sundial, which was the reason that he came over into this realm for the second time in the first place, because, Bowditch has died and he's trying to heal this dog. He's so adamant about it. And he succeeds in that regard, but Radar escapes and he is taken into the aforementioned captivity, trained for competition and, this blood sport of sorts. And that's really to Jason's point, where the book kind of comes to a grinding halt. You gain a little bit more lore, but it's as King even mentions at one particular point, it's like Charlie is listening to all of the different things that he can from fellow captives and whatnot, and he's trying to like piece together the timeline himself, even though he knows it's probably not particularly accurate as far as a younger brother in Eldon who is kind of picked on and not loved and whatever, and goes into this evil presence that's down in this well. And so once again, yes, in the third act, guys, we get going down into the evil layer of another evil being, although it does go a little bit more Lovecraft than I was expecting. So if King is going to do the HPL dedication, he would have had to have given some sort of payoff. And in the back half, he does that. Doesn't mean that I'm just jumping right to that right now. But yeah, let's see what others have had to say. I want some more thoughts from Lou here. King's familiar elements work quite well, especially making characters, writers, and or readers, allows him to reference other worlds we readers all know and love. Touche. Good point. Okay. Radar hit hard with me because we lost our dog Bella this year to old age. She was a spunky fox terrier. Yeah. And that's where, as I mentioned earlier, you can tell that King has such an affinity for canines, man. He loves his Molly. I think they have felines too. I think they also have cats. But nonetheless, it's the scene where Radar has been reinvigorated from the sundial and they're in the midst of escape. And Charlie is like, I'm a fraud. I'm not going to be able to take care of you at all. I'm going to be taken into captivity and you're going to be on your own, girl. And and yet Radar is like looking at him so affectionately and like, oh, we're having so much fun. And so, it's kind of a cool but very accurately amusing dichotomy. Movie Mike says the shed gave me some From a Buick 8 vibes for a while. Yep, and that's actually celebrating an anniversary this year, and I'm about to revisit that as well, which is exciting. Justin follows it up with, I think it's a pretty good intro to King for younger readers. Good call, Justin. That is actually 100% on the money, man. I think that this, in the fact that up until a little bit in the end, but everything else is relatively tame as far as like bloodshed and craziness of that regard. This is very much it could be chilling with the YA sort of stuff, and even for the younger, if you don't want something like The Outsider where there is very graphic discussion of what happens to that little baseball player or anything of that nature, this is most definitely, especially with the fantastical element. I agree. It was unsettling when Radar fell into the background halfway through the story. Yeah, I most definitely agree with that sentiment. Jason says Bowditch was pretty much Stephen King in my mind. Yeah. As King gets older and a little bit crankier, as you can kind of tell from his Twitter. That's not to say I don't agree with what he's saying, but he is most definitely turning a little bit into, you've seen the Simpsons episode where it's like old man yells at cloud or whatever. Anyway, Lou chimes in once again with, I like those sections. I found the sections where Charlie met the princess and so on the hardest to get through. Yeah, okay. That dichotomy, I know the fact that he's so adamant about being like, I'm this tough, I'm like a dark prince and so on and so forth. I'm like, is this Twilight, dude? Like, Come on, man. I'm not a Disney prince and so on and so forth. I'm like tough and I'm mean. That stuff felt forced and lame. And this is one of the few times, as opposed to dancing around stuff, that I thought was a little inadequate. That I thought was cheese, and it did not resound to me. It felt like trying to be cool as opposed to just, walking the line, so to speak. But yeah, yeah. In any event, a minor gripe. Dan Simmons, there you go. Hyperion is sci-fi. Well, I've heard Hyperion is like a little bit of sci-fi and fantasy, from what I'm not mistaken. I know there's Hyperion, Beyond Hyperion, and then Lou, aren't there like two other books that are tied into that particular world? I don't know. I had a friend who was growing up insane into the Dan Simmons stuff. So Bowditch reminded me of Roland. Okay. I mean, maybe as far as like cranky hard-headedness, like, at times. So Juggler Assassin says, it sounds dope, to be honest. I'm just waiting for the Pocket Books fiction version before I pick it up, even though now I know it's a non-Dark Tower related book, which I was really hoping for. Yeah, once again, just to veer back to it, a lot of us were hoping that the Institute was going to tie directly into the tower, and that didn't either. And so I think the King is making a very cognizant decision not to tie that stuff together, which is so funny because, guys, in the 90s and the aughts, like King was, and even in the 80s, King was very much about tying his work together, which I suppose that he still is, but it's less of a direct connective sort of thing. And it's more of just like, as I said earlier, an Easter egg kind of nod and wink as far as, stuff goes in comparison with, I don't know, those sort of deeper, like big time connective sort of things, which I wish he was still doing, but maybe the MCU was like kind of turned him off to it. Hey, Made a Live One says Infinite Duality. Well, I wasn't 100% if we were actually going to do this today or not, because Cecil and I were even messaging a few hours ago, and I was like, heard from a few different King friends. They're like, when are we going to review Harrigan's Phone? Should we push to Wednesday or a different day? And, since he is the showrunner and, I'm, a lower level than him, despite all the years that we've worked together, and with good reason, it's his show. No criticism here. But yeah, he very wisely was like, well, check it out. We have the new Chucky series and we have the new Hellraiser film. And so we want these episodes to breathe, because we have tried previously in years past to try to just overstuff the proverbial turkey. We did 2 episodes a day for a few years there. We've been doing the horror show for like 8 years now, man. And so, conventions, screenings, all those different perks, whatever. And obviously, if you guys have any inclination, the TeePublic is downstairs in the description, and oh goodness, what else? The Patreon, so on and so forth. But back to it. Yeah, we have tried various approaches as far as just doing shitloads of content, doing more minuscule, more relative and important sense of content. And so that's where we're still trying to find that sort of healthy medium, I think. But because of that, it looks like our thoughts on Harrigan's Phone, myself and Cecil, we're going to review it together. Probably isn't going to be till next week. So, but it almost happened differently. Okay. The Gray Man. Oh, you were very kind just the other day when I was giving some thoughts on Smile, because I had a schedule conflict and did not get to go to the press screening. And so Cecil and Marcia checked that out, and I gave some very brief thoughts about that. But anyway, the Gray Man says, I love the book except for the section where Charlie was locked in the dungeon and forced into the competition. Yeah, that seems to be kind of a common gripe, not just from me, but a lot of people. It's, they say that, King actually thanks his editor all too often, but I'm just looking very briefly. I want to say the page count is almost 6 in this one. Yeah, with the acknowledgments, 599. So yeah, it's hey, it could have been twiddled down a little bit, just like Smile, which was almost 2 hours, could have probably been a little bit tighter at like maybe 140, 145, something like that. But hey, it is what it is. King is at the particular age and just esteem and distinction where if he just wants to, go all for it, Cameron style, do that director's cut, get all crazy with it, I'm all for it. Apples and Oranges, says Juggler. Assassin, Jason Vizcarra says Fairy Tale is a good entry-level King. Yep, I completely concur with that sentiment, as was mentioned earlier. The Gray Man says, I see this being a good gateway book to King for fans of other genres. Yeah, and yet the one thing that I was kind of Gray Man wondering a little bit earlier, and I'm not sure if you had actually tuned in at that particular moment, is I was wondering like if the hardcore fantasy fans, you know, if they would be okay with this one, or if they would be like, oh, King is trying to go like lore deep and he's trying to, you know, I don't know, he overstep his boundaries, maybe. I mean, he's very much esteemed for being like a horror slash dramatic writer. And he's kind of made a name for himself in like the hard crime sort of stuff in the last decade or so with Mr. Mercedes and you know, Colorado Kid and later and things like that. So I don't know. I still think that he is most definitely not known for being a science fiction or a fantasy writer as far as his genre storytelling goes. And so there might be a little bit of like pushback in some instances, and that's where I was just especially intrigued by like the hardcore fantasy fans about, you know, those who are also King fans, or even more importantly, if you weren't a big King fan and you just gave this a shot, what you thought. Lou says, I wonder if King will ever finish the Talisman trilogy. Apparently, he and Strub had pretty much mapped out the story. Yeah, Lou from the Stephen King podcast is correct. It's been sitting on Wikipedia for years at this particular point. They had an outline from what I understand, and you know, King doesn't like outlines, but Stroud does like outlines, and so they had the idea. But I remember a recent interview where he just it was before Peter passed, and King alluded to the fact that he didn't really know if they were ever going to get to that third book, and he just very low key referenced Peter's health and how that was probably going to be a deciding factor, which is a definite bummer, man. Because Black House, and I'm not going to spoil Black House. I'm here to spoil Fairy Tale. I'm not going to spoil Black House, but I had a lot of hopes that if this wasn't like a direct Dark Tower connective sort of thing, that it would most definitely connect to Black House / the Talisman. Spoilers, it didn't do that either. So, okay. I just really want a Tower book that has a new protagonist that breaks Roland's time loop and frees the whole group. Wow, Damsey, interesting. Well, you know, did they ever, not to get like hardcore Dark Tower spoiler, but did we ever really distinguish if anybody was in said loop aside from Roland? I don't really think we did, which is why, you know, you had the whole like Christmas and Coco around the tree sort of thing. And yeah, I guess Susanna did have kind of a mild awareness, but it was almost like that residual. It's fading quickly, almost like Bill at the end of It, you know, where he's going and trying to find his wife and whatnot, and he can't even remember, you know, what Richie did for a living or Ben's last name or whatever. So I don't know. The movie, right, was supposed to put all of that at ease. It was supposed to be the last time around. You fucked it up. Sorry. I'm going to be kind. All right. Anyway, Jose Storms jumps in with, I'm kind of curious what Holly is going to be about. It's released next year. Laughing out loud. Yeah. Well, apparently, from what I understand, King is he had to alter the year that the Holly thing takes place in, or maybe it was this one that he had to alter where it takes place in because of the fact that he didn't want to deal with all of the, you know, Captain Trip stuff, as I so affectionately called it. But yeah, we do have the next presumed release as far as like a book proper is none other than Holly. I think that is still like the title from what I understand. So, hey, there you go. All right. Movie Mike says, it may just be me, but I found the writing itself in the book to be some of King's best. It felt very crisp. Yeah, there is most definitely kind of a free-flowing, I don't know. There, like King has had stilted sort of prose in the very recent past. And that was one of my biggest issues with Billy Summers. I felt like the stuff where he was in hiding, as silly as it was with his disguises and all that stuff, but the endearing aspect of the relationship, kind of like the older brother sort of thing that he has going on with that girl, I thought that was really good. But the stuff where it was the flashbacks to him, you know, back in the Middle East and everything, I thought that was very chonky and just, I don't know, it did not flow. This kind of like riding the bike, right? And if you're writing things that you've written before, I hate to go there, but yeah, that's why it felt very familiar and very comfortable, and why I think King was. It's like, okay, if I'm hitting a baseball, because King loves baseball so very much. It's like, okay, I didn't practice for, and I had the off season, whatever, and now I'm back at it. It just feels natural. Because it's something that I've done so many times. It's almost like a muscle memory sort of bit. And I think that's why, despite all of the comparisons, and even if I've been a little critical, that's why I still enjoyed it. Even if from a critical standpoint and from a journalistic standpoint, I can, objectively be like, well, there's this and there's this and there's this. That still, once again, guys, does not mean that I did not find enjoyment within it. So, okay, Red Wedding says, Joe, yeah, okay. The White Walkers, yep. I had a feeling that everybody who actually watches Game of Thrones was going to be like, yo, mofo, this is what it is. Yeah, it's one of those shows that, because I set up a Patreon recently, and I have been like, okay, what am I really going to, for me personally, that's not horror show related, what am I going to break into as far as like a watch that, peeps might want to actually take in with me. And it was like, well, it's probably going to be either like a Game of Thrones, or it's going to be like a Breaking Bad, like some of these shows over the last like 10, 15 years that I didn't personally watch, like a Dexter maybe, or a Sopranos, or a Wire. I mean, yeah, I've watched dumb shit like My Name is Earl and Pushing Daisies or whatever. And yet there's a lot of those big marquee shows that I did not properly check out. So, thank you for the clarification, everybody. I thought the prisoner section was like Gladiator. Yep. It's a lot of like Gladiator. Yeah, I mean, I've been wanting to rewatch the Ridley Scott director's cut. It's a great friggin' movie, man. I'm not the biggest Russell Crowe fan, but damn, is he great in that one. Okay, Lou also says, movie Mike, agree. Writing is tight. King combines so many different elements seamlessly, and none of it is jarring. Yeah, and maybe that's a double-edged sword a little bit, the fact that none of it is jarring. I mean, I know, Lou, you're saying that none of it is jarring from like I was just saying with Billy Summers, for instance, from like, a very like shift in the prose sort of thing where the style of writing seems to change. It all seems very seamless in this one. I will definitely concur with that. Okay. Oh, right. My fave line is on page 595, but shame is like laughter. In inspiration, it doesn't knock. Good stuff, man. Good stuff. I still have a bunch of quotes on here that as I finally catch up with everything in fairy tale mode, that was one of my favorites. If we're just going to go right into quotes, you get used to the amazing. If it's in your world, you go with it. And that's where he's just essentially talking about there's no like modern technology of sorts in this other world. I forget the E word that is, he gives it a distinction. He finds out like the proper term for it. But yeah, it's, they even talk in the epilogue a little bit about the fact that they have vehicles, and, they have a different form of power that's very, it's like wind power or something. It's a little eco-friendly, which is all great and stuff. But when that particular line, once again, just to double down on, you get used to the amazing. If it's in your world, you go with it. If you're like me, who is in my late 30s, and I bore witness to like the advent of the internet, and like carrying around these little mini computers and stuff that now function as our phones. I just think about kids today, where they are begotten, like they are born and they grow up in this very drastically new world of technology that I thought technology was crazy advancing, when I was a kid, and yet they're just like born into it, as opposed to seeing the ascension and the improvement and whatnot. And so you just kind of take it at face value. I thought that was a very intriguing thing for King to mention there. Jason says the sundial felt like a nod to the carousel, and something wicked this way comes. Well, Jason, yeah, it was very obviously a nod. He even mentions it in the book. He mentions it specifically in the book, by name. So yeah, it was, and that's another thing where it's like, okay, are you deriving inspiration? Are you paying homage, or are you just kind of copying ideas? I don't know. I've heard many people say that it's okay if you're kind of like copying it, if you reference it, and if you just, I don't know. There's like some sticky tar here on my cup, and I'm getting all crazed about it. But yeah, guys, it's that's I guess something that I would throw out in the live chat here. Like, what is okay as far as taking pre-existing ideas and reappropriating, refashioning them? Is it better if you make reference and you're just like, yo, this is like Salem's Lot, for instance, which is very obviously inspired by Dracula, and there are a few references here and there in that particular book. Is that better, or is it I don't know, is the tactic is the tactic improved or just a little bit more easily digestible if you take the inspiration and you try to refashion it a little bit more and don't call attention to it? I'm not sure. Okay, Lou says the Dark Tower story is mostly done so King likely no longer is compelled to his recent stuff to tie back to it. Yeah, and you're totally right. It's just tower junkies like myself, Lou, that really want that sort of connective tissue. And the fact that when I saw him on Sleeping Beauties, the book tour that he did, the fact that he made mention that he's got one more Tower story in him, and obviously everybody is like, okay, is it going to be Jericho Hill or whatever? But yeah, I think after two different entries specifically, Lou, and to everybody who's tuning in and watching, I think after two different instances where we thought it was going to be Tower tie-in sort of thing, and we didn't get it, I think that ship has sailed, especially at King's Age. I think you are completely right, Lou. You are wiser than my years. The movie To Harrigan's Phone comes out tomorrow on Netflix. Yes, it most definitely does. It comes out in less than 5 hours here in my time here, Mountain Standard in the States. Okay, Lou says just listen to the Kingcast episode where they interviewed Glenn Mazzara. His version of the Dark Tower series sounded tight. Want to see that pilot so badly. Lou, you are in the same boat as me. You and I both know a lot of the same people, or at least are acquainted through the interwebs. Man, if you haven't seen it and I haven't seen it, I know. Was it the Losers Club podcast that saw it, or was it Kingcast? I know it was one of those. They were able to, just like me and Cecil, through somebody from the Lock and Key comic book, who I'm not going to mention because I don't want to get that person in trouble. But we were able to see those two early pilots of Lock and Key that never went to order for series before they actually did the Netflix show. So I'm really, really hoping at some particular point I get the chance to see that. But yeah, who the hell knows? All right, so this is Lakers Nation. Haven't read a Stephen King book. Now you make me want to read one. What's the best one? Reactions, best thing about this channel, and reason I come back. Well, Lakers Nation, I am very curious how your big three is going to do this particular year. Can Russell Westbrook and Homie actually coexist? I'm very curious about that. I'm a big basketball fan, everybody, but this is obviously not basketball talk. Just to answer the inquiry, my three favorite, the unholy trinity, as I all too often call them, are The Stand, It, and Pet Sematary. So those are his three best, and at least in my estimation. And so there you go. The best one, that's hard to pick. Have you read any? I haven't, man. Okay, so we're just about all caught up, and we've been going for a little over an hour, which is exciting. And so I'll have to lightning round my notes here. But okay, well, his best books are It and The Stand. Oh, yep. Smaller bites that are good ones are The Shining, Misery, and The Dead Zone. Thanks, Lou. I will give The Stand a shot. Wow, well, The Stand is definitely very long. So if you're looking for something shorter, I always recommend Pet Sematary. But there you go. I only watch Game of Thrones to shut people out. It still sucks. I've heard good things about this House of the Dragon, but once again, I'm not of that particular ilk. Fuego, having his get off my lawn moment. Yep, I most definitely do. It's like old man shouting at cloud, as I was saying. Okay. Russell Westbrook, bro, and the Suns going to come back strong. I got to step in the playoffs. Okay, so it's officially veered into basketball talk, which is totally all right. But that is obviously not why I am particularly here today. Happy endings seem to be in short supply. I dug the mind train. Yeah, that was another bit where King basically says that after Charlie has jumped into this other world, I did enjoy the fact that there was almost like this mind translation aspect. Like he thinks he's speaking English, but it's almost like I don't know, like incoherent sort of alteration, so others can, but and yet there's still flubbubs here and there. I thought that was pretty cool. Okay, here's another quote. There's a dark well in everyone, and it never goes dry, but we drink from it at our own peril, even though it's poison. I think that's more or less me not quoting it specifically as I recall, but that's just kind of Charlie after he has the one and only aspect of competition that he engages in where he kills this dude. And yeah, that's kind of his self-reflection afterwards. And he's just like, damn, dude, just killed somebody. And yeah, yeah, relatively hardcore in said regard. And something that was mentioned earlier, deep lore that's briefly explained, but dare I say, underdeveloped. And I like the Gog Magog stuff, and yet once again, it's another or descending into the layer of an evil presence that has taken stuff over. And yes, we have, Eldon, I think his name was the younger brother, and how he's turned into, this Nighthawk and stuff. But so we have this major villainous presence, and yet it's all like puppet mastery sort of thing by this big evil HP Lovecraftian. Like we end up getting tentacles and all that sort of crazy transformative whateverness in the very end, where him and Leah and Radar, or Leia, whatever, go down into this like nasty underground area through this well. But yeah, I guess the epilogue is where it does shine a little bit more, and once again, King covering his butt. Although I must say, I didn't like where King went with this little love story with Leia and Leia. God, am I remembering her name properly? I just have to double check. Yeah, of the Galleon. That's right. Girl with the sealed off mouth and everything, and King has this bit in the back half of the story. It's nothing like what transpires at the end of it, but it's of a relative uncomfortableness, albeit to a significantly more minor degree. So Charlie is in this recovery sort of situation after this nasty bite and infection and everything from what Petra, I think, was the name of this follower of the evil presence. Anyway, the Nighthawk. And so he gets something from Leia that is a thank you fuck, a mercy fuck, and I'm like, King, there really wasn't any reason to have this. It almost takes like a little bit of the endearment and the innocence of the fact, but then again, Charlie is supposed to be older. And the thing that didn't really make a lot of sense about this either is the fact that he's supposed to be kind of virtuous in a couple bits in the book where his friend who he, just engaged in so much mischief with, as far as like, blowing up mailboxes and dog shit and bomb threats and all that different stuff. He had this horror girl that loved H.P. Lovecraft and the Dead Kennedys and whatnot that he kind of had the hots for. And he's like, no. And he told his friends, he's like, no, she's not. It's not like that with her. And his friend is like, well, what else could it be? So he's supposed to be this like virtuous whateverness, and then he has this like little bang down with girl. I don't know. Maybe that's just me reading too much into things or whatever, but I thought it was just kind of lame and unnecessary. But whatever, it is what it is. And yeah, that really, I mean, kind of covers a significant amount as we are nearing the 90-minute mark of the stuff that I wanted to say about this. I can understand so many different constant readers who are like, this fits like a glove. It feels very comfortable to me. It's got that nice nostalgic factor. The prose flows very good in said regard. I still think that the book set itself the most apart in the middle section, despite the fact that the back half of the middle section, the aforementioned dungeon bit and the captivity, is where the story really loses a significant amount of momentum. And then I also feel like the back half of the insurrection and then going down with Radar and Leia into the belly of the beast. If I'm going to quote a Danzig song, great Danzig song by the way, down in the belly of the beast I lie. Great song. I want to hear that right now. God damn it. Anyway, I'm going to put it on right after I finish this live stream. But yeah, guys, it's still good. it's good but not great, at least in my personal estimation. And so I'm I mean, Life of Chuck is the last King thing that I really read and loved, and yet that's only one segment from If It Bleeds. And then later, I also really, really loved. I'm kind of getting the itch to revisit Billy Summers after this because so drastically different in every possible capacity. I'm still incredibly intrigued about what he's going to do with Holly next year. But big thing that we have not talked about just yet is that shortly after the release of this book, which seems to happen with just about every Psy King book lately, is that the adaptation rights were immediately gobbled up, gobble, 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 gobble. And by none other than Paul Greengrass being set to direct an adaptation of this. So if you guys don't know who Paul Greengrass is, he did a number of the Bourne movies, which were, I don't know if he did Bourne Identity, but I know he did a few of the sequels. United 93. So he's a very upfront, in your face, sort of director, which makes me wonder, being a big, lavish sort of fantasy tale, how this is going to play out if it actually gets made. And the reason I say that is because Harrigan's Phone was fast tracked and we're getting it tonight here in a few hours. But there's so many things that get optioned, Psy King wise, and they never come to fruition. And I did a whole video about the fact that this new Salem's Lot movie that was test screened and did not do so well. And there's this whole new regime over there at Warner Brothers and stuff. So we don't know what the hell is going to happen to it. I would not be surprised going forward if the King Assance, and this is me being predictive and just off my own head, this is not any sort of foregone conclusion or whatever. This is just my personal opinion. But I genuinely think that the King Assance has passed. 2019 through about, 2017 through about 19, maybe 20. I think that now it's not even so much about quality. It's in just the consumption of media sort of habits about people that I think the new King stuff, we're not going to see anything in theaters. Like none. Donuts, yo. I think it's going to be on streamers, most notably. It's going to, excuse me, it's going to harken back to when so much King stuff in the late 90s, early 2000s was either a television miniseries or it was a direct-to-video sort of bit. So it's going to, I think that if being the keyword, if we see Salem's Lot, it's going to be on HBO Max. It's probably where we will find it. It's not going to be theatrical. I know they're saying this new Tommy Knockers is going to be theatrical. We haven't heard a peep about that since it was announced that James Wan was producing. There's various others in levels of development from what we understand. But I'm not holding my breath, man. I'm really not. I think if we do see new things, they are going to be on Prime, HBO Max, Peacock, Netflix, whatever. I know we did see Firestarter in theaters earlier this year, but that didn't perform particularly well, even though I appreciated aspects of it, but it was another one of those dual releases. I mean, shit, dude, if NBC Universal is going to dual release the new Halloween movie with the amount of money that those last couple of films have made, I mean, the landscape is changing. And so for that reason, yeah, I think that as far as King stuff goes, we saw the last gasp pre-pandemic of just the theatrical experience, most notably with it. And from there, I don't know. So get ready for Mr. Harrigan's Phone tomorrow here in a matter of hours. And everybody on the East Coast, or if you're in other territories, you might even have access to that already. But yeah, allegedly, Paul Greengrass making a feature film of Fairy Tale, which makes me sad because, optioned by Hulu just a few years ago, Eyes of the Dragon. I guess fantasy wasn't quite as in vogue as it is right now with, the series that we've talked about, House of the Dragon and, Rings of Power and, Wheel of Time and all these different things. So I guess maybe the marketplace is a slight bit more ripe for a, feature adaptation of this. But if you're going to do it right, you better be ready to shell out some money, said studio, entity, whatever you may be, because this is a very descriptive book as far as even if it is, familiar sort of, adversaries and situations and whatever, it's still a very lavishly described book, from not just enemies and the evil baddies and stuff, but from the landscapes to, I mean, everything from initially getting into this sprawling abandoned city to the graveyard bit to the dungeon to this huge multi-leveled kind of coliseum where the competitions are transpiring. Like, yeah, this is a movie that if it is done well, it is going to demand a lot of money. So if you skimp, it's probably going to end up being like a Cell, or I mean, there's a lot of King stuff that functions incredibly well on a low budget, and I would actually contend that a good majority of his stuff does in that regard. This is a completely different story. I think it's another reason why the Institute, despite the fact that those rights were gobbled up initially, right when it was about to be released, it was supposed to be a AMC series. We haven't heard shit about it since those rights were gobbled up by Viacom to presumably be a ongoing series. So that's the kind of culprit for my skepticism about Sai King adaptations. But yeah, as we get to the very end of things here, since we have been going for the 90-minute margin, and I extend a grande gracias, everybody. If you haven't done that little thing down there, and just hit the little thummies up, it's significantly appreciated. It helps us keep the lights on, as I all too often say. Okay, Fuego, we need to do a palaver sometime soon. It's been too long. You can come on my show anytime. Lou, I greatly appreciate it. Maybe we should do like a 2022 in retrospect look back sort of thing about the couple things that he has released and some of the adaptations that came out, like Firestarter and Harrigan's Phone, once it finally hits proper and whatnot. So I would love to do that, man. We were initially trying to get together our own. Cecil was the spearhead, along with a girl who we know through the local horror scene here. We were trying to get together our own horror convention here in the Phoenix area in October. And excuse me, no, that's right. We were trying to do kind of a December thing, and it was going to be like a spooktacular celebration for the Christmas holiday. But unfortunately, like the venue and certain other red tape and hoops we had to jump through did not work out as well as we would have liked. But yeah, man, I would most definitely love to get that going together. Okay, but yeah, buddy, okay. Jose Storm says, on a side note, I'm currently reading Rose Matter Revival, as they are library editions and due soon. Oh, okay, interesting. You should really start a Suns channel. You know a lot about it, and that yeah, I'll show that. Why the hell not? Yeah, I'm a diehard Phoenix Suns fan. They lost to a Australian professional team the other day, and it was kind of embarrassing from a national and international standpoint. But hey, it just shows that the league is getting far more international. It's my favorite sport, so I played it growing up. My mom played it in college. It's basketball and soccer, or football real, as I like to call it, if you're going to Ted Lasso that shit. So okay, Holly dealing with something during COVID. Yep, and Chernobyl, dude. The Chernobyl television series, my goodness, one of the greatest, most harrowing, amazing things that I've ever seen. Depressing as all hell, but okay. King's material is better suited for streaming anyway. Yep, I totally agree, Lou. 100%, man. Made for TV film, whatever, that's fine, which is what Harrigan's Phone is, which is what 1922 was, which is what Gerald's Game was. My big hope about Harrigan's Phone is that Netflix has a solid track record of those other few films. So I'm not expecting, anything that's going to knock my socks off, because the Harrigan's Phone short story, or novella to be specific, did not knock my socks off. But I still enjoyed it. I liked aspects of it, and I'm curious to see where they go with it. I mean, Donald Pleasance and Jaden Martell, I want to say the kid's name is, who played Big Bill in 2017 and 2019 at the younger version of Denbrough, obviously. But yeah, I'm very excited to watch it later this evening and get a review done with Cecil. So okay, right on. 2022 retrospective would be great. 36ers, damn, you are a basketball. Yep, I am, unfortunately. I was listening to that on the radio when I was driving back from Cecil. I was filming our big review roundup with Cecil and Marsha and Robert and the gang, and I'm riding back and I'm listening. I'm like, the Suns are down by 10. The hell is going on? That team lost to Utah like last 3 years. Anyway, this is not Fuego basketball talk, but I will take that into consideration. Anyway, all right. Love the vids, dude. You're awesome. I am humbled and honored for the kind words. And so, okay. as per the request of a few, I believe Carol in the Hail to Stephen King Facebook group, she was like, "What's the book of the month?" I was like, "Well, book of the month has been askew in the last few months because of the fact that my schedule has not really allowed me midweek on Tuesdays to do a like live stream sort of situation. So it's been moderately haphazard, unfortunately. But I came up with an idea earlier today, and this may be a little more difficult for some because one of these two stories is a little more difficult to get a hold of. But since they're both a little bit on the shorter side, at the beginning of November. So let's see what that specific date is because I want to make sure that I am not. So, oh, well, November 1st. So your Halloween hangover will be in full play. But Tuesday, November 1st, we will be discussing the first Bachman book and the last Bachman book, at least for now, the Bookman. Boo! Yes, boo, boo. Yeah, that's kind of a thing, right? Around spooky season, Halloween. But the last Bookman book, which is none other than Blaze, which is relatively short, as you guys can see here. I want to say it's like maybe around 3. I don't even think it's 3. It's right around there. 285. There you go. So you've got that, bada bling. And then the first one in this pristine, guys, I found this a while back at, like, look at this. This is in like divine condition. Anyway, thank you to Goodwill and the scouring and the hunting. But the very first Bachman book is Rage. So we're going to bookend Rage and Blaze. So it's going to be on November 1st. And I've made sure my schedule is kind of lined up where I will be able to actually do it properly this time. But Blaze and Rage is going to be a two-headed snake of sorts. And yes, I know that Blaze was something that King wrote way back and then he retooled and released and so on and so forth. But it is the most recent and presumed final Bachman story. And Rage, which I have significant feelings about, which I've talked about here and there, but not given a proper review to and haven't revisited in a number of years. So it's going to be interesting. I've only read Blaze once, and that was when I was doing my initial, march through all of the, released King stuff in its publication order. So yeah, it's going to be all that I remember about Blaze is there is a disabled robber who is seeing like the apparition, the ghost essentially of the dude that he was committing crimes with. And I know there's a baby involved, but yeah, it's really in a lot of ways, I'm going to be returning blind to that story in many aspects because it's been that long since I've actually read it. It's been at least 5 years, I think 4 or 5 years at this particular point. So, and Rage, yeah. Everybody has an opinion on it, myself included. So that is what we are doing here in the month of October. There is still going to be a few other anniversary books. I know the reasoning behind both of these. Blaze was released in 1977, so it's the 45th anniversary of that particular book. Rage was released in 77, the 45th anniversary. And then Blaze was released, I believe, in, I want to say 2007. Let's double check so I don't feel like a derple. But come on. Yep, 2007. So this is, man, Blaze is 25 years old. Who else feels old? Thinking about the fact that the Sai King book that I used to see all the damn time and, the Goodwills and the Savers and stuff. Tons of copies of that one. I would imagine a lot of people didn't necessarily like it as much as they were hoping to. But nonetheless, that is a double down. A few other anniversary releases that I'm hoping to get to before the end of the year are different seasons. And as somebody brought up earlier, from a Buick 8. So it's, both of those are, I believe it's the 40th anniversary of different seasons, 82. And then for from a Buick 8, I believe it's the 20th anniversary, 2002. So exciting stuff to keep in mind. And going forward, we're going to have a review of Mr. Harrigan's Phone coming. There's also a Stephen King cookbook that I'm trying to devise a very fun video to incorporate, me and maybe Lady Catherine messing around with some of those recipes, which is exciting. There is a motion comic for the Little Green God of Agony that I'm going to be covering for its anniversary release. So yeah, October, I'm not resting on my laurels, despite the fact that there is so much for us to check out. I'm feeling in a fairly good headspace lately, which is incredibly breathe a sigh of relief sort of thing, because September was a little whacktastic here and there. So once again, I extend a grande gracias, everybody. I have been Jaime Fuego. You can find more on all social media sectors like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Here on YouTube, I've been trying to get a little bit back into the personal infotainment stuff. If it's something that has been covered on the horror show due to scheduling conflicts, like with Smile, I've been doing these little 1 minute reviews of stuff, YouTube shorts. So Infuegotainment, youtube.com/Jaime Infuego. That's where you can find a couple of those. And then also lots of older reviews from me, mostly comic book stuff, some drama stuff. One of the best things I watched recently was Emily the Criminal with Aubrey Plaza. God damn, that movie was exceptional. I had uncut gems vibes of uneasiness in what was transpiring. So that was really good. And in the back half of the week here on the horror show, we have the second season of Chucky that is about to premiere. I think myself, Cecil, and Robert are all going to be covering that, along with Hellraiser, which I am stoked about. David Bruckner, man. Woo! Very, very excited. So, yeah, that's essentially going to be the end of the proceedings here today. Don't forget to check out the, just closing out some of these windows. Don't forget to check out the Hail to Stephen King Facebook group, where there is all kinds of cool palaver going down. I'm trying to re-inject myself a little bit to the Facebook, but I'm really kind of pondering about a Discord for Hail to Stephen King specifically. So that sort of palaver isn't under the thumb of certain entities in comparison. I know everything is big and corporate, but anyway, whatever. That is something that I will try to keep some updates about here in the Shocktober, the spooktacular that is this 10th month of the year. And so I wish all of you happy holidays. And until the Wheel of Ka comes around once more, hasta luego, sin amigos, constant readers and viewers alike, say thank you. I hope we have been well met today. We share more of this palaver sooner rather than later. And until then, remember to stay scared and read Stephen King. I have to at least say, read this one and make up your own mind. Even if I'm going to compare it to everything that King has done before, I think that you will possibly get a significant more amount of enjoyment if you have not experienced all of those other King books that I have. Just personal opinion. And don't forget, Rage and Blaze. Don't forget, Rage and Blaze. Don't forget. And I look very forward to seeing all of you next week. Long days and pleasant nights, peeps.